Good evening and welcome back to the shop here in Canterbury, New Hampshire. We've talked a lot about various techniques and building of projects and aspects, but the thing that can make or break a successful project is the materials that you have to build it with. And usually they, in my experience, quoting jobs in the past, the cost of the materials came out to like 10% of the overall cost of the job. Labor was the number one factor. So it's a shame that such a small component of the project can really undercut the overall result. And so tonight, I'm going to share with you some of my approaches to finding the best material, how I pick it out, and then how I handle it when I bring it back. Over the years, I've had a number of people contact me and ask, hey, could I come along with you sometime when you go buy lumber? And I know there might be some people watching right now who I've had that wonderful experience with. And I'm thinking to myself, well, sure, yeah, but why would you want to go buy lumber? But I guess there is kind of there is an art to it, and a lot of things you learn, and there is an approach to getting the best material for a given project. Now, it's almost like hunting. You know, sometimes it's big game hunting because you're looking for that real trophy piece of wood. But how I go on the hunt has a lot to do with the particular project that you're looking out for. For example, if you're looking for chairs, it's a lot of smaller elements. You're probably going to be looking for 8/4, like thicker material. And so you'll be you're not so concerned with finding these wide, nice planks, which you would be if you were making something like a dining table or a chest of drawers, where you want the sides to be awesome, you want the top to be, the drawer fronts to be nice, and all that. But so it's not as stressful to me, I guess, when I'm looking for chair material as when it's more of a panel, a solid wood like type, especially a dining table. Because if you're building a dining table out of solid wood, one of your biggest concerns is that that top will be harmonious as much as possible. You know, you're not going to want usually a lot of sapwood in there. You're not wanting to have trees that vary heavily in coloration, because even within the same species, they can vary a lot. You know that, especially with some woods like cherry. So you really want to work hard to take the time and choose well. Because if you choose well, like for a dining table, you'll not only have a harmonious top, but you're gonna simplify your time in the finishing room greatly. And the result will be a thing of beauty, you know, and you'll feel good every time you look at it. Usually you're going to find wood in the rough state. So it's not going to be smooth like this. So this has been planed. This is some of that big leaf maple we got from Goose Bay. Man, that was over a year ago, right? And this is all planed one side. It's not perfect. But this piece of wenge, you can see how rough that is. You see the bandsaw marks, the mill marks from the bandsaw, and you can't read the actual figure as well because of the disruption of the surface by that rough saw mark. You see how much better you can read the surface here, where this is the big leaf. They would even sand one surface for you to be able to see it. This piece here is cherry, and you can see that has rough saw marks on it as well. But when you buy rough material like this, they sell it generally in 1 inch, 2 inch, and 3 inch, and 4 inch. Going on and on about this. But they do sell it in all those different thicknesses. And there is 1.5 inch, 1.25 inch, but they don't say 1.25, 1.5. And some of you are old hats at this, and I'm sorry to bore you with this, but when you go to the lumberyard, they don't call it that when it's in the rough sawn. The terminology at the sawmill were these like big heavy clicks on the saw of 1/4 inch each click. Okay, so 1 inch board would be 4 clicks on the sawmill, or it would be 4 quarters. Okay, 4 quarters, and that 4/4 is usually a good full inch. So after it dries, it's not unusual to buy 4/4 that in the rough is 1 to 1 1/8 inch thick, 1 1/8. So the way they figure is that with any kind of curvature that happens in the drying process, because when it's wet, it's going to be sawn wet, it'll be flat, but then when it dries, it's going to reshape as it settles out and dries, and you get some cupping and whatever. They plan it for you to be able to get a 1/4 inch less in the finished dimension. So assume you're guaranteed with 4/4 to get a 3/4 inch board, okay? But if you're milling it yourself, you can usually get much thicker than that for certain situations. So that's why I like to mill it myself. You have a lot more control, and you know, if you wanted a 7/8 inch piece, you can usually get it, especially if it's a small dimension. You can chop it up to smaller pieces and then thickness it and control it that way. All right, so 4/4 is simply 1 inch in the rough heavy, and then of course 6/4 is going to be 1.5 inches. You get the drill. 8/4 is 2 inch heavy, and you pay a little more per board foot. Now, what's a board foot? A board foot is simply a square foot of material 1 inch thick. If I had twice this thickness, if this was an 8/4 piece, same dimension, it would be 2 board feet. Okay? If I had half of it, but twice as thick, it would still be 1 board foot. See that little trick? Length times width, divide by 12, times the thickness will give you the board feet, okay? All right, so enough of that. What are you gonna bring? When you go to get your lumber, what you gonna bring? Well, I like to bring a number of things. I always come to my drawer here and I get something. I gotta mark the lumber with something. So I'll bring chalk, a big piece like this, nice big piece. And then I'll bring, this is professional. If you show up with a lumber crayon, people, they look at you with respect. They have different colors for different kinds of woods. So see, if you're dealing with like pine like this, this is the black. Oh man, that's a good lumber crayon. It's harder and just writes better than the Crayola. It's not like that. It's made to write on wood, so it's great. So the black really shows up well, but white not as well. So you're going to want a darker. You can use chalk if you want. And then when you're dealing with wenge or dark woods like walnut, the black doesn't show as well. So that's where your good friend, the yellow crayon, comes in handy. So it depends what you're shopping for, but you want to bring something to mark with. And of course, you're going to bring your trusty tape measure. You want to have that with you. You're going to have your notepad with your materials list. One other thing I bring with me is a Spokeshave, and that's in case I want to see what the surface is. Now look at this piece of cherry down here. I can see it looks pretty good. It looks like I have some sap here, but I'm not sure. Is this a dark piece of cherry, or is it mid-range, or what? So with a Spokeshave, I can just go down and skim a little area, and I say, oh wow, I've got a big chunk of sap there, and I can kind of see the color here. And I can also, if I had a couple boards that I knew weren't from the same tree, but I planned on using them for a singular dining top, I could skim plane both boards and see them in the daylight. Now I can see the actual surface, and I can get some better read on the coloration of that. Because cherry, if you work with that, you know it's notorious for having quite a range sometimes in its species between the darker and the lighter boards. So that helps you a lot to do that. And no, I have never had them get upset at that. You're taking off a minuscule. You're actually helping them in a way, because the next person along, if they see that, they're not going to feel like they got ripped off some dimension. It's going to have to get plain. You're actually helping them to see what they're buying. But I don't think you want to mark it up. I only mark it when I know I'm buying it. The other thing that you want to bring, and I think I got sidetracked, but if you have a funky shape like this bench seat, I mean, look at that. How do we know how wide a board we're going to need for that? And these unusual shapes, if you've taken any of those courses with me, you know that it's really wise to find the widest material you can in the thickness you need when you're dealing with one of these, because you can kind of nest them, that curve, just right inside and get several right across the board. It's less wasteful. And you get better looking benches because the legs are the same. That's a true concept in chair making. So let's pretend we got all our stuff, and now we're going to the lumberyard. Oh, by the way, we made a video at a lumberyard. We actually were at Highland Hardwoods in Brentwood, New Hampshire. If you live in New Hampshire, you might know where that is. That's where we made that video. So if you see me there, you go, hey, wait a minute, that's not Goose Bay. Well, back then, that's where we were.
Yeah, they were gracious to let us come in and film. And you can see that at the video link in the description if you're curious. It's just sort of a supplement to this.
Right.
How do you approach a board you bought where the check in the board is not visible when you purchased it? Not visible until you hand plane the surface down. Then you see the check and you...
Oh, man. A check, what we're talking about is this. Look at this. That happens because the board dries more rapidly on the ends because all the tubes come out in the air and the moisture escapes more rapidly out the ends of the straws. Think of it like drinking straws. The water's spilling out the ends of the straws, and this makes it want to shrink faster at the end, but it's resisting in here because it's still got a lot of moisture, and so this is drying and shrinking, and it has to check and split to allow for it to shrink. So that happens when it just goes too fast on the end. But it's not uncommon. Some species you see it very little, like white pine, you hardly see it at all. Other species, and it depends on the cut, like a flat, plain sawn board, you're going to see it more readily. But they seal the ends to prohibit that, or to limit it. I'm going to show you that and when we get near the end here. But the question is, so let me just finish. You really want to inspect the boards to be sure you don't have any ridiculous checks. This is a 2 to 3 inch check here. That's kind of a lot. You know, you don't like to lose that much material on the end. But I always assume 2 inches off the end, and because if you discover one later, it's really a pain. But look at this one. I've got another one right up here to here. That's like 6, 7 inches in. Yeah, 7. And it's annoying. So you're going to have to use on the side of that. You won't be able to get a good plank all the way up to the end. But the question was, what if it's not on the end, but you find a check up in here somewhere? Well, part of that is the buyer beware. You know, you really should inspect it. The other part is that sometimes you can go back and say, hey, look, this was improperly dried, or this is too much. I want to trade this board out. If you haven't done anything with it already, and most lumberyards will agree with you, because you're not paying for checked material. You're paying for quality material, like they grade it out, and when they put it in the bins, you're not buying a grade that anticipates mid checks. Okay, where I've had the most trouble with it, and I have returned boards, is with notoriously difficult to dry hardwoods. And one of them is white oak. Because the pore structure the air doesn't come out fast enough. They have to dry that slowly. It's a pain for them to dry. They even steam it, and the process just has to go slow. And if they go too fast, they get what's called case hardening, and the outside dries and it gets really kind of hard, and the inside, it goes too rapidly inside, and you end up with these little honeycomb cracks and fissures in the middle of the board, which so you couldn't anyway see them until you cut in. So if you ever get that with white oak, and it's a hassle, I know, but I've returned batches because I've got it and go, this is ridiculous, this is unusable. And that's not on you, that's on the product. That was poorly dried and you didn't get what you paid for. However, if it's just an incidental check or something, you got to be on the lookout for that. The other thing is, sometimes I've been in a situation where, you know what? I didn't see it, it was here. It's not really a big defect. I should have known, I've seen it, and I didn't. So sometimes I'll just rip the board up on the check and then rejoint and glue it up. Just take your medicine and move on. And usually, if you do that, it's going to cure all ailments and it's going to be fine. And so, but it does give you one more seam. Because you're gluing, though, across that board, it's usually pretty near invisible. So let's say we're at the lumberyard now, and you're going to get there and find that the wood is all stored into bins, and all you can see are the ends like this. So this would be, it'd be a huge bin, most of the places I've ever been to, and they have like a rail here, and they'll fill up with certain species, then another rail, and it's usually the same species, a different thickness. So you might have 4/4, 6/4 here, next to it you got your 8 and your 12, whatever. So you're looking at all the ends and they're all stacked and buried. So you can't see, you can only see the surface of those on the top. Now you're going to go flipping through them somewhat, especially if you're going for a dining table. And if it's a dining table, as I mentioned, that's a little trickier. So I'm going to be shooting to find my top first. That's the most challenging, most critical element. So I'm hunting for that first. I go right over to the regular 8/4 boards and see what's there. Sometimes they'll pre-dress it and take a little off. But that can be annoying sometimes, because if everything's pre-dressed to thickness, it's usually down already to 13/16, sometimes 3/4, and that messes with you, because you're going to have to flatten that again because it's not perfect coming through the mill at the lumberyard. So for fine furniture, usually I'm milling my own, especially a dining top. It's not unusual. I'll bring it only down to 7/8, no more than 13/16. We're going to look at the ends of these boards, and this is what I would be seeing. And it's hard to see much going on there. These are hard to read right here. But I can see the grain. Normally you'll be able to see, I can see the grain on this one. Let me draw it for you, because I don't think it's going to show on the camera. I've got these lines going like this. Okay, so that's showing me the grain. That tells me this is a plain sawn, boring piece of wood. It's almost too plain sawn because the growth rings are out here like that. This one is more, I'm seeing the lines come down more like this. I'm getting a little arc in here. So I'm going to have more linear grain over here, more stable material, but it looks nice. The other thing that you've got a big advantage of having it like this is that you can see the density and whether it was a fast or slow growing tree by how close the growth rings are. So I'm usually looking for the slowest growth, the densest material I can find. So just check this out for it. This one you can see a little better. Can you see that end? So look at the growth rings on this piece of cherry. And quite often, like at Goose Bay, they'll have clean chopped ends, so you can actually see the end grain on them. But this has a growth ring there. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so those growth rings are 3/16, a 1/4 inch apart right there. And then they get like 3/16 out here. That's a fairly fast growing tree. With cherry, it's not a huge big deal, but you're not gonna have as exciting a surface. This is not bad, but you can see it's really wide banded here. And then over here, you get more to the linear where you get the angular and even like 1/4 sawn grain right over at the edge here. So that's still not a totally undesirable piece because it's got a nice color and it's a wide plank. So if I'm going for dining tops, I'm looking for the widest, longest, most dense material I can find. The longest is key because I can get more cuts to assemble my top out of. So I'm going to get that harmonious color and figure throughout the top. Here's another example of an end grain, and this is a 1/4. See, that's 3 inches thick. But look at the difference. The growth rings here, like 1/4 inch. Look how tight all these are. These are about a 1/16 to not even an 1/8. So this is a much slower growing tree, and there's a lot more years in this tree. I should have counted them first, but I can see that's probably 40, 50 years. And then this one right across here is like 6 years across this inch. So 6 per inch here, and it looks like you've got at least 12, more than that actually, per inch here. So I think this is probably close to a 15 per inch. So that's quite a difference, and I'm usually looking for that. So when I'm on the end like that, I know the width that I'm looking for usually in my project, and I will have this whole bin full of boards, and I'll just go through and I'll put little chalk mark on the ends of the ones that fit my requirements. I can see I like the density of the grain, and it's wide enough, but I want to get a good look at it, okay? Then once I have all the ones checked that I think have potential, I'll just start pulling them out or flipping them, and I'll pull the ones out that I like. I'd stand it up against the bins, but here, I'll stand it on the wall, like that's as if it's on the bins. And then I'll stand up the last one. So then I can stand back and start looking at color and how does it look? Is it going to work for me? But if it's not a dining top, it's a lot easier to deal with. You still don't want something so light, but I can tell this one's kind of dark. And look at, I planed a face of this board. This is an extremely dark piece of cherry. Look at that coloration. It's got a lot of reddish in it. So this makes it a challenge to use with another, let me show you, here's another piece of cherry right here. Look at the difference. Both cherry. This would be considered, sometimes they'll call this lighter material Adirondack cherry, but because the further north you go, the lighter in general it is. But there are some trees that just have this deeper, redder pigmentation to them. So this would be a problem. You wouldn't want to glue up a tabletop with this by this. And I really try to stay away from this kind of pasty, lighter cherry, you know? It just doesn't have the richness. Now, it will darken over time, but usually when you're buying it and you're getting it, it's a little bit in between the two, like that, okay? All right, so, but each hardwood has its own idiosyncrasies that you get to know as you start working with it and how it matches up. Cherry, I'm using that as an example because I have those boards here, and it is one of the more challenging to shop for. Walnut blends quite nicely board to board. And what else? Maple's fairly agreeable too. Usually you're putting a color tone on that, so you're not as worried about it. But there are things you can do in the finishing room to bump them or adjust the tone quality, get them a little nicer together.
So will some yards separate plain, rift, and quarter sawn?
Yes, they will. They'll usually quarter sawn will be separated out, but rift, not so much. It's usually, well, I know at Goose Bay, they typically don't separate out the rift. So you're either dealing with plain sawn, or they don't even say plain sawn. They'll just say, here's the cherry. And then over here might be quarter sawn cherry or figured cherry, where you have, once in a while you have curly cherry. And they'll distinguish if there's a notable feature to it, like curly or quarter sawn. The boards they usually separate out for quarter sawn are those like white oak, which quarter sawn wood yields those medullary rays that make that real nice fleck pattern. So people are buying it for that. And in the quarter sawn, curly maple pops a little more as well. But you can, if you buy wider material, you've got some of everything there. Here, we've got plain sawn here, then we've got some rift right in this area, and it turns to quarter here. The general rule is 0 to 30 degrees from the surface is plain, 30 to 60, I'm talking about the angle to the surface, 30 to 60 is rift, and then 60 to 90 is quarter. Lastly, I do measure out my various parts and start thinking about, okay, I'm gonna come on up. I know I need, my top is gonna be 48 inches across. I've checked for checks. I know I'm gonna start a couple inches up, then I'll come up and I'll say, all right, 48, I'm gonna give myself a little extra and just work it out like that, you know? So well, I don't quite get 2 on that one, but so I would see if I could go a little further that way. And then I'll make a double line right where I'm gonna cut it. So this, I might say, this is a top, and I'll put an arrow like that so that when I cut it, I could reassemble this one right away. So I'll know where the boards were. Now, sometimes you'll have to cut it at the lumberyard to, like I said, fit it into your vehicle. But the nice thing about laying it out while you're there is you don't have to rethink it when you get home. You can go, okay, I already designated that board for the rails of my chairs. And you've got that kind of measured, and you go, okay, those are my rails. So when it comes time to start sorting and start milling your material, you don't have to go back and think, oh man, which ones were my top? So this is just a big time saver. Plus you're in the natural light of, usually you've got a lot of natural light at these lumber dealers. So you've got the wood standing there and you're getting a really good read on the coloration of it, okay? So the pattern, if I had a pattern here, this is where it's gonna come in handy. I'd be looking for a quarter stock for this leg, because it's kind of it's a full, nice full leg. I think it's 1 3/4 after dress. So let's imagine I had this board. You can see I get one here. Let's just make a general, whoops. Of course, I'd be starting nearer the bottom. And that would get me one there. And then I'd slip over next to it, and I could get a second one. So I know that this one's wide enough to get me 2. And then I could probably get some kind of part out of this middle area. But you do lose some if you don't get a wide enough piece. Now, if there happened to be a wide enough plank, like let's say there was a plank 8/4 thick, and it was this wide, I could go more like this. Well, I can angle it slightly. Yeah, I guess I can't do it that much. We'll see if we can I'll leave a little gap there. I could get 2. So I could definitely get 3 out of that. So that would be better to have a wider plank. I have done dining chairs where I had 24-inch wide slabs. I mean, and I got a set of 16 chairs right straight across both sides. So that's unusual.
What about cups and twists at this point of inspection?
Good question. Yeah. You are going to be looking for that. Usually when I'm pulling them out of the bin and I've got the chalk on them, before I stand them up, I'm pulling them out, I can sight the board. Cupping is not usually a big deal because you're going to anticipate that you'll have a subtle cupping because of the milling. But if it's a massive one, then you've got an issue. But it's not typically that bad or a deal breaker. Bowing is when it's curved along the length. So the flatness, like let's say I've got a board and it's bowed this way. That usually comes out as well. If it's severe, then it might limit you, because if you need a longer piece and that bow or curve to it is going to limit the thickness you can get out of it. But usually you're going to chunk it up into your rough lengths, then dress it to your thickness. So a bow is usually shortened significantly, and you can get the thickness you want. The big problem, in the worst of all those defects with shape of the material, is twisting, because that's like an inherent kind of memory in that tree. It has a twist to it. So when you dress it out, it will get stable, but sometimes that twist, you'll see it kind of in there again. And it's a nightmare. If you try to use a twisted piece, you can flatten it and get it good and everything. You never want to use it as the style of a door that's thin, because that, especially if you put it on the hinge side, it's going to twist. It's going to twist, and it's going to twist that whole door. That's a big problem. You really want to use quarter sawn in cases like that. I know this from the hard way, right? I've had this happen. So you really want to look for that when you're pulling them out. The other thing I'm always on the lookout for are, of course, the checks we've talked about. We're looking for knots. This is a pretty clear, wide piece of cherry. That's a nice one. But some of these, that's pretty clear as well. But you can see this one has some knot issues. We've got a knot there that we'll have to work around. And we got one right flat in the middle there. That could be a problem. So depending on what the project is, we'll have to decide, can we work with that? Sometimes our pieces will fit right between there. We could just say, oh, these are my rails here. And then I'll just say, all right, I'm going to just figure I'm nixing that and go from there, whatever your project is. One other thing, when you get it home, storing lumber, I wanted to talk just for a minute about that. A lot of times you'll want to build a lumber rack. And lumber racks are good because they can go along a wall, but there's two kinds of lumber racks in general that, the horizontal racks. There's the kind that are fully surrounded and you got to slide the boards in from the end, in and out from the end. So basically you end up seeing the material almost like you saw it at the lumber yard, just the ends. And once you stick that material in there, sometimes it's in there for years, right? You know. The other kind of lumber rack is more like the cantilevered arms coming out from the wall, so you can set the boards in. You can put so many on these arms because there's not a post in the front, and they'll take a certain amount of weight and width. That's more accessible, so you're more likely to use that wood. It's a little more attainable. My favorite way of storing wood is like this, on end against the wall. And downstairs I have a lot of boards along the wall. And if you can bring it inside, obviously these are 10-foot ceilings. You don't always have that luxury. But if you can chop the material, if it's like an 8-foot and you've got that room, you can put it there. And what's so nice about it stored like this is you can handle it with one hand, barely any energy at all. like pages in a book. You're just looking at their material like nothing. And it's up out of the way, and I try to get it pretty vertical. And because it's dry, you're not going to affect it cupping anymore. It's dry, and you store it so that you're not stressing it out. It's leaning there, and sometimes I'll actually give it a little air between, especially after I start dressing the material. But we're not going to get so much into dressing the material tonight. Just kind of storing like that.
Okay, Ed's asking, does Tom have a percentage of overage that he purchases for a project? Does that change depending on the species you're buying?
Oh, that's a good question, because I used to try to cut it really close when I was starting out. I didn't want to spend anything extra, and I didn't have a lot of room for error or defects later on. And I learned that the hard way. I mark it out like this with the boards, but I'm feeling kind of generous when I'm laying this out. And I'll usually throw another board in there, that might cover me, because I would say it's probably 10. It's like laying it out with a generous feeling there, and then it's probably 10, 15% more, at least, right? Because you're going to be surprised by something. You might make a mistake. That happens. And but you usually, it's like you discover something that you didn't anticipate, or especially if you go back to the dining top again. If you're dealing with that, you really want to have more than just 10% extra. I would get 1 or 2 boards extra, so that you're going to see something that might work. And then the one that you don't use, you can probably use for rails, or you'll use it somehow. Just have it in your inventory and figure you'll get a little extra that way. One of the big problems we have with storage are what to do with the little pieces, right? Is this too nice to throw out? This chop saw table has a lot of little cubbies in it, so I can put my shorts in here. I try to stay roughly to species. Like I've got a bunch of, those are cut-offs, I think, from making, so this was from making some kind of white oak chairs. So you have that curvature for the back leg, and there's some sap, heavy sap on that piece, which I didn't use, but I've got, a bunch of those pieces that are usable there, and then chunks of walnut here, and some more white oak here. This is some nice quarter sawn, thinner piece of white oak that could make some nice frames or something. Quarter sawn walnut, and then chunky pieces over here. So I'm trying to keep it roughly in place. Here's a good chunk of cherry. This is one of those pieces that would make an awesome bowl, right? So just storing usable chunks right there. I don't have any better place. And then over here, I've got just a smaller little rack that I keep longer, narrower, short pieces. So longer, short pieces. So so you get the idea. It's like a 2-tier process here. So 1 to 2 feet-ish are here, and I try to keep them roughly to species. So we've got some walnut, there's a piece of mahogany in there, and then cherry, and then lighter woods like maple, and that's almost all maple. There's 1 piece of butternut in there. Same thing here. Now it's a little taller, 3 to 4 feet, more maple, cherry, some walnut, some wenge. Oh no, this is some of that cocobolo from those letter opener things we did. And then we got some mahogany and purple heart. And then over here, out of the box, there's even more maple and some more chunky material down there. But you just, after a while, you get overrun with it, and you got to just part. And you go through and you go, you know what? That's just too small. I'm not going to use it. But I do come over here, when I need a small piece to run a test or something. It's nice to have this little resource right here. But if you start to get overwhelmed, you got to chuck it out, right? We've got a wood stove in our basement, so I love to bag it up. And we store it up all year, and it burns great. Let's turn around. I'm going to show you my favorite method for handling short pieces when you got to turn them into kindling. This might seem like a silly, dumb thing, but this really was a game changer for me. I was at a guy's shop who was more like a manufacturer, nice business, making Windsor chairs and all this, had big shop. And I saw him one day, he had some guy was just chopping up all their shorts like this and putting them in bags. They were like these heavy, like a burlap, like a heavy mesh like burlap bag. And I'm like, oh wow, where'd you get those? And I forget, he had some source for them. But I couldn't get those. And then I got to thinking, that's a great idea. Really to have a bag. You don't want the bag too heavy, but it has to be a tough bag. So, some of you probably already do this, but I discovered that to buy trash compactor bags was an awesome purchase and way to store this material, because I can chop it up like this. Throw it in my bag. Then when my compact bag gets full, I'll take it out of the ridiculously rotten plastic container, and I'll put some more in there, and I'll fill it up until, I get it to about here, and then I just tie it off, and I have a healthy bag of kindling. And they work great because they're tough. They don't tear open, and they don't go anywhere. Plus, they keep out of the weather. So if you want to store them where there's a little more moisture, it's okay. And you can stash them, and you can give them to neighbors and friends for their fires if they want. And it's a wonderful way to transport, to carry, and you can get rid of your scrap super easy. We put a link to what I get. I get them, I just order them on Amazon or something like that, and you get 40 bags for like $12, $13. And it's awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you do want to go deeper with us, head on over to epicwoodworking.com. You can join our mailing list there. Like, share, and subscribe as well. And, we had a good time. Thanks for stopping by. On behalf of the camera lady and myself, we look forward to seeing you next time.